Mr. Speaker, we just got off 2 weeks of working in our districts around this country, and at least I held about 10 town hall meetings. I'm sure many of my colleagues held more. We talked about the debt and we talked about the deficit. But one of the things that almost every one of these town halls insisted upon talking about was the high price of gasoline. Let's start with this first exhibit we have here. This just gives a comparison of what the gas prices were somewhere in the United States. I can't tell where. January of 2009, unleaded $1.32, mid-range 142, super 152. Then here's a picture taken in April of 2011, regular $3.99, mid-range 409, the high-powered stuff. For anybody else who had the ability to make a deal with Cuba to get a lease offshore to drill, but American production. But he promised that after they got all of the cleanup done and after they examined what happened in the BP case, that they would lift the moratorium, and with a lot of outcry from the Gulf states, because for the first time, at least in the state of Texas, until the moratorium on drilling in the Gulf, the state of Texas was looking pretty good on unemployment. We were still in the 6% range, as the rest of the nation was in the 10% range. But when you shut down potentially 250,000 jobs that relate to the drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't know how many of those jobs were actually lost, but those were the ones at risk. And as a result, that and other factors, we're now up into the 8% unemployment range, which is still better than the rest of the country, but still a really direct cause of the moratorium in the Gulf. And then when the moratorium was lifted, they refused to issue permits. But first, because the federal court told them to lift the moratorium, they lifted that moratorium and issued a new one the next day, or maybe 2 days later, which was, I would say, fairly much in contempt of the order of the federal court in Louisiana. That federal judge, in turn, made several comments about contempt of court. And so finally, after years, the moratorium was lifted, and another 6 months later, or 8 months later, a few permits were issued so that drilling could begin. Remember this: Barack Obama, when he became president of the United States, President Obama promised that he was going to open up offshore exploration and enhance nuclear energy. He's failed to do both. The only energy policy he's dealt with is one that we certainly need to develop. And no one here doesn't want to seek alternatives that are economically viable to make this country run. This country is an energy-driven country. Just look at the lights in this room. And think of the energy and the amount of windmills it would take just to power up this room almost 24 hours a day. But we're for, and in fact, I would say the great state of Texas has the largest wind farm in the entire United States. So when it comes to energy, we don't shy away from any kind of energy in our state. We are an energy state. And we have been producing oil and gas in the state of Texas for, I guess, close to 100 years. It's clear back to Spindletop. We are not the experts, but we're as close to experts as you're going to run into, because we've been doing it through generations of Americans. I remember when I was 17 years old, my big desire was to go work on an oil rig because of the great pay those people got paid. My daddy wanted me to keep all my fingers, so he told me I couldn't do it. But I always wish I could. It is something we grow up with. We don't think oil and gas are evil products. And we don't think that they are the curse of this country. We think they are the primary clean power source in competition with other power sources of the petroleum age. And we think we do a good job of producing clean energy, and energy, we think, that is the cause of the great modern expansion of American government. remember, when we're talking about petroleum products, we're not just talking about power for your automobiles and power for your trucks and power for your power stations and all the other things that we use with oil and gas. We're talking about plastic. We're talking about life-saving chemicals. We're talking about clothing. There's a list of 100 different products. I can't even list them all that have come from the production of petroleum. And now, for some reason, we have an administration that treats petroleum and treats petroleum products like natural gas as if they were some kind of horrible, evil poison, because of this issue which is unresolved of carbon dioxide. So we are sitting here on the verge of something that will ultimately shut down our economy. You know, I can tell you from personal experience, because my wife sent me to the grocery store 3 Sundays ago, and one of the things on her list was avocados. And this is in Texas. We're pretty close to Mexico. We're pretty close to California. 2 avocados cost $1.25. The next week, she sent me back to get 2 more, and they were $1 a piece. So I started watching those things, and holy cow, they've gone up 3 times since that first purchase of avocados, and you wonder why. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's weather. Maybe it's a crop failure. Maybe it's the fact that the cost of energy is going up daily to power the fleet of trucks, to power the diesel-driven trains, to power the automobiles of America. And as gas prices go up, or diesel prices go up, so do the prices of food. And now the 2 inflationary prices that we see going forward are food and energy. This is serious stuff. And I'm very pleased to have a fellow Texan join me here today, Blake Farenthold. He's a new member from down on the Texas Gulf Coast in a city that grew up with petroleum surrounding it, Corpus Christi, Texas. I'm going to yield to my good friend, Mr. Farenthold, whatever time he should need to talk about his views on energy.
Thank you very much, Judge. You know, I grew up in the oil and gas industry. My great-grandfather, Rand Morgan, came to Corpus Christi after the Great Depression and was one of the pioneers in the oil and gas industry in the Saxet Field by the Corpus Christi International Airport. We've been a farm and ranch and an oil and gas family since before I was born, since before my father was born, and since before my grandmother was born. Rand Morgan is actually my great-grandfather. And we can tell you, as landowners, as outdoorsmen, as hunters, and as fishermen, the oil and gas industry is a clean industry. The men and women who work in the oil and gas industry are committed to the environment. The landowners whose land is used for domestic oil and gas production are committed to making sure the oil and gas companies do a good job and keep their land in great shape. You know, you talk about offshore too. Corpus Christi is the home to some of the largest fabricators of offshore oil and gas equipment in the world. Port of Brownsville has several industries building and refurbishing offshore oil and gas, and our fishermen love the offshore oil and gas rigs. They're artificial reefs. They're where you go to fish, not fishing for sport, but fishing for the fish you're going to take home and fry and eat. They're clean, and they're great for the environment. You know, we had a horrible accident with the BP well. Our beaches in some parts of the country suffered with some contamination. I think it's the second time I remember that happening in my lifetime. The first time it happened, there was a blowout of a well in the Gulf of Mexico operated by the state-run oil and gas company of Mexico. You know, not a whole lot happened with that one. We had tar balls coming up on the beaches of Corpus Christi. It was an annoyance, but we took some wipes, and you wiped your feet off after you got off the beach so you didn't get it on the carpet or your cars. But what we've done now as a result of the BP blowout is we've shut down the oil and gas industry, the American oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico, while the Chinese, the Brazilians, And the Mexicans continue to drill in the Gulf of Mexico, and there's not a thing in the world we can do to stop them or regulate how they do it. Instead, we're penalizing our oil and gas companies in the United States. We're decreasing production that's available to fuel our cars, to power our electrical generating plants, and to create the hundreds of products that rely on oil and gas. Our focus is wrong. We should be looking at ways to increase production and increase safety and increase our ability to respond in the event there is another accident. We need to be training the Coast Guard. We need to be training our industry personnel. We need to be developing the technology to contain it and to protect our beaches from oil and gas spills that may happen as a result of the activities of any country in the world. We have the opportunity to be the technological leaders in this and get our domestic oil and gas industry back on track and get the price of gasoline back down to reasonable levels. We're getting to $4 and $5 a gallon gasoline. You know, that doesn't just ruin your summer vacation, it starts to ruin your life. You know, you can cut down on driving, you can take the bus, you can take public transportation, but those avocados Judge Carver was talking about, they can't. They've got to get to your grocery store in a truck. Every good or service that you use or buy is affected by the price of oil and gas. It's going to run the price of everything up. We have got to get this under control, and hey, we have got to exploit our domestic energy sources. You know, I agree with Judge Carter. Texas is the leader in wind farms. It's a beautiful sight as I drive down Ocean Drive in Corpus Christi, looking across the bay at the windmills across over by Sinton, Taft, and Portland. That's the future. But you can't put a windmill on a car. You've got to have oil and gas to run your cars. Now, we can get into a discussion about we probably need to be focusing on getting cars working on natural gas as a more cost-effective way to do it. We've got a great abundance of gas now, of natural gas. But we have got to get rid of the moratorium, the de facto moratorium that is crippling the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. It's running prices up. It's costing us jobs in Texas. And, you know, I want to talk just for a second, if you don't mind, Judge Carter, about the portrayal of the oil and gas industry as being an evil industry. It's real easy to talk about these big corporations, big oil and gas producers like Exxon and BP. I've got two things to say about that. First of all, I imagine if you've got a retirement plan or a pension, you're an owner of one of these oil and gas companies. Your pension plan, your mutual fund, they're all investors in these companies. But that being said, really the bulk of the oil and gas are produced by small businesses, by independent operators who are 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20-man operations that take a chance, go out there and explore and drill, and every time they find a prospect, they go out there, raise some money, they put their money on the line, and they are on the line. If they drill a dry hole, they're going to have to struggle to get their next paycheck. But this is the entrepreneurial spirit that built America. These men and women are not evil. They are our neighbors. They're concerned about the environment. They're concerned about this country, and they want the price of gasoline that you put in your car to be reasonable. They're not profit gouging. You know, we can show charts about how the price of gas is going up and why it's going up. But, you know, we don't really have to, it's not that hard of a question to look at. If you took a middle school government class, you studied economics and finance, you learned about something called supply and demand. And supply, especially in this country, is down, because we can't drill and produce offshore. We can't drill and produce in massive areas of land that's controlled by the federal government. And we've got a regulatory scheme that's looking at making new technologies to produce energy more expensive and possibly illegal. So the supply is down. Then you look across the globe at our competitors, China, India, Korea. All of these countries are seeing newfound wealth. The old movies where the Chinese were riding around on bicycles, that's not the way it is in Beijing anymore. The Chinese are driving cars. Their factories are using oil and gas. And they're competing on the international market for that oil and gas. Our national security, our economic security, and our very freedom lies in exploring, finding, and producing our domestic energy resources. That's the way we're going to keep America free. That's the way we're going to keep the cost of our goods and services down. And that's the way we're going to keep the price of gasoline in check. Thank you, Judge. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. And as an expansion of what you just said, let's talk about some of the things that this House, the Democrats in this House, and the President have talked about as a solution to the high price of gasoline. And that is they're going to cut the tax breaks for the oil producers, and they name, Chevron, Exxon, BP, the big, what they call the majors. And they're going to cut those tax breaks, and therefore they're going to make sure that those billions of dollars worth of profit are not going to be there, because they're going to reduce these tax breaks they've given, which they say are billions of dollars. Well, let's just stop and look at what these tax breaks are about. All the oil and gas produced offshore in other countries is not subject to American taxation, and that's where the majors now produce somewhere between 80 and 90% of all the productions of the majors in the country. And in fact, those drilling inside the continental United States, almost all those people drilling shallow water offshore, and a few of those people drilling deep water offshore, and none of those people are majors. They're all from you were talking about the entrepreneur spirit of the wildcatter and the small producer who is going out in an attempt to expand domestic production. And by the way, they're the only ones that take advantage of any tax breaks that are there. And they're not billion-dollar companies that we use as examples. So the cuts are not even, the way I understand it, not even going to affect ExxonMobil or affect Chevron or these big producers from overseas, because those tax breaks don't pertain to that production. They only pertain to production in the United States. And those are done by independents. Almost the vast majority are done by independents. So the only people that get hurt, again, by the tax policies of the Barack Obama administration are the small businessmen. Just like everything we see coming down the pike at us seems to be targeted at the small independent entrepreneur who's trying to make it go. So don't be misled to think that the majors we see all these massive amounts of money they're making are the target that's really going to be hit by the shot that our colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle have proposed that we should take in getting rid of all, as they call them, subsidies, which is really tax breaks to the producers of domestic production. And by the way, they've put all offshore production offshore. They've shut it down. Just recently, Shell Oil Company, after dumping a couple of $1 billion in an offshore operation in Alaska, or off the coast of Alaska, pulled out completely because before they could even get started, after dumping a couple of $1 billion with a B into that production field out there, the EPA came in with more and more stops and stop orders and other things, so they finally just threw up their hands and said, we're going someplace else. We're not drilling in American waters anymore. It's not worth it. So right now, where we know we have production for oil and gas, we have an administration that is fighting that production tooth and nail. This has cost jobs in the industry, as we pointed out. This has made our dependence on foreign oil bigger. Here's the price of the skyrocketing price of the Obama administration since he's been in office. Here is another chart that shows you the offshore field production of crude oil in thousands of barrels per day. And look at this. This is where that production was. 250,000 barrels up to 400,000 barrels. down again, I guess that was in 99, in the Clinton administration. It went down, back up in the Bush administration, into the Bush administration, boom, down to 100,000 barrels of offshore production today. From 400,000 to 100,000 since the Obama administration. Nobody can argue that the Obama administration is anything but violently opposed to the oil and gas industry. And they are doing everything they can to throw big roadblocks in front of production. And then you wonder why the speculators are saying, you know what, $5, the price of a barrel of oil is going up because they're speculating. You know how many millions of gallons of aviation fuel a company like American Airlines or United Airlines or Continental Airlines, any of these major airlines burns every week? Do you know what they have to do in order to stay ahead of increasing prices on fuel? They have to speculate on futures on the cost of fuel. And when you speculate, and I'm not blaming the airlines, there's plenty of other people that are speculating because they say, let's see what's going on in the world. We're finishing up a war in Iraq, which is one of the major producers, but it's been out of the market for years and it's barely getting back in. We're sitting here with a moratorium on all the offshore domestic production. We're not opening up any federal lands for production anywhere in this country. The Obama administration has shut down any of the leasing practices on any public lands. And by the way, Texas is the only state in the union that didn't turn their public lands over to the federal government. But the rest of the country, in areas like Idaho, Utah, we know there's production up there, up in Wyoming, up in Montana, all that stuff that the Canadians are now producing across the border. The fields on our side of the border are being curtailed by the administration. They just don't want to produce oil. They just want to buy it from foreign sources. And these foreign sources, as the people who study the market, they say, my gosh, Libya is not available anymore. Iraq's not available. What happens if we got no production at home? The market looks shaky. We better buy futures on oil. And guess what? The price goes up. It doesn't take rocket scientists to say they see a shortage coming down the pike. They're competing with India and China, two of the biggest competitors we've got for any kind of energy that's out there. And then we're going to sit here and we're not going to buy the chance to buy fuel at a cheaper price now than what it might be 6 months down the road. Of course, speculators are going to do that. Of course, industry is going to do that. So as my friend Blake was pointing out, the lack of production, the lack of faith in in what this government is going to do to this industry, and the fear that the shutdown will be complete, it just sets up in this situation for the price to go up. When the price goes up, then the price of gasoline goes up. And by the way, if you either you add more taxes to the cost of the oil production, or you take away the tax breaks for oil production, who do you think is going to pay that increase in cost for the oil industry? Well, I'll tell you, it's going to be the guys and the gals that are filling their cars up with gasoline at the pump. To the extent that any business has an increase in cost of their production, they do the very best they can to pass that cost on to the consumer. That's the way any company, whether it's steel, whether it's widgets, whether it's buggy whips, whatever it is that you produce, if your cost goes up, the manufacturer passes it on to the extent that he can, and still stay within the price limits that are set not by the government but by the demand of the consumer. Then the price goes up. So you're not going to lower prices by taking away subsidies to the oil and gas industry. The only thing you can do is raise prices. It's not going to lower prices to discourage production. That's ridiculous. If you have the law of supply and demand and we got a short supply and you're discouraging production, the price is going up. You learned that in the 8th grade, as Blake pointed out. This is not hard stuff. This is easy stuff to figure out. Sometimes I think some of these folks that don't understand the oil business, the only oil they know is it's what's on the end of their dipstick in the crankcase. But the facts are, this product is a major product to the modern society of the American public. And I think the American public know it. And I don't think they're going to get fooled by demagoguery on these prices. My colleague wished to have more comments.
If you don't mind, Judge, I wanted to reiterate what you were saying. You know, demonizing the speculators isn't a way to do it. The speculators are the users. They're the airlines. If you want to double what your vacation's going to cost, you take away the airline's ability to hedge their fuel prices. And you know what? If you want to stick it to the speculators, let's open the spigot, and those guys betting on higher prices are in trouble. They're gonna lose some money on that. So I just wanted to reiterate. I wanted to definitely reiterate that fact. And you know, if you take a look at what this nation's policy is today on the oil and gas industry, if you were trying to concoct a way to run up gasoline prices, you probably couldn't come up with a better way to do it than we're doing now. It is like we are intentionally trying to raise oil prices. We're limiting production. We're making production more expensive. We're using our regulatory agencies to make it more difficult to drill. We're not leasing any of our land. If somebody had come to my office and said, Blake, how can we make gasoline more expensive? I'd list out exactly what the executive branch and the federal agencies, the regulatory agencies, are doing. I can't think of a way to run the prices up that they haven't. If, as we are hearing, the president's goal is to get prices down, the 8th grade is the answer. Increase the supply. That's all it takes. And it's easy to increase the supply. Sure, we can't flip a switch and do it overnight. But in a matter of months, as we open up federal lands for leasing, as we reopen the Gulf, as we get the permitting process under control, those prices will turn around and they will go down. Helping the oil and gas industry lower prices does not mean we abandon alternative energy. All of the above is the answer. I think some people on the other side of this aisle and in other offices in this town believe that it's either or. Let's strangle the oil and gas companies so our friends in the alternative energy can thrive. It's not like that. The energy demands of a modern world are such that all of the above is a correct answer. Wind, solar, safe nuclear, and a stronger reliance on natural gas that is in the ground in supplies just 5 years ago we couldn't have imagined with the breakthroughs in technology we have producing shale gas. Coal. There's no one answer. Every watt of electricity, every BTU, everything we do lowers the cost and raises the standard of living of everybody here and abroad. I am sick and tired of less, either or. This is the United States of America. This is the 21st century. Yes, we can. We can have it all, and we start at the pump. Thank you, Judge. I yield back.
I thank you for yielding back. And there are consequences to any action that you take in this town. I wanted to point out something I said in a committee hearing one time. We were having this debate. I said, those people who want to do away with oil and gas and have wind industry as the solution better strap a sail on their Volkswagen and hope the wind's blowing towards Washington tomorrow morning, or we're going to have a severe employment shortage in the U.S. Capitol. But seriously, it's more than that. Look at this quote from the Heritage Foundation. How many jobs does the anti-drilling agenda of this administration cost? The cost in jobs is startling. A new analysis by the a Louisiana State University professor, Joseph Mason, projects national job losses at 19,000 from the drilling moratorium, with wage losses at 1.1 billion. About 1/3 of those jobs are located outside the Gulf region. So not only did the people in the Gulf lose jobs, and do they continue to lose jobs, but these jobs, believe me, there is somebody somewhere within a 100-mile radius that we are right now that is producing something that goes into the production of oil and gas, because it is a nationwide and a worldwide industry, and all of the machinery and all of the other complicated gauges and all the modernization of the production of petroleum, all of that is far beyond just the state of Texas and Louisiana and the other Gulf states. It circumvents the whole globe. So jobs is another important reason why we have got to do something about this whole concept that this administration seems to have, that we are evil because we produce oil and gas. And yet, guess what? States that were criticizing us for production of natural gas 2 years ago are dancing around campfires in their states now that they learn that they've got shale oil in their states. And some of our Midwest and Eastern friends seem to all of a sudden be really excited about the fact that they've discovered they've got shale gas beneath their land, and they can produce good, clean natural gas. And I say more power to them. And I hope they can. And I hope their states and this federal government doesn't throw up roadblocks to the production of that shale gas, because it is safe. This fear of fracking is a hoax, because we have been doing fracking in the oil industry for 50 years. It's just amazing how all of a sudden a process that is almost normal to production, to get the second round of production out of almost any old well that was drilled in Texas, is using some form of H2O fracking, water fracking, to get that second round of production out of a well. And people rework existing wells with all types of processes like fracking. And that's fracturing is what that means. So but are there solutions that can bring the price of oil and gas down? Yes, I think there are. Here's one that our good friend Doc Hastings has proposed: reversing the President Obama's offshore moratorium, establishing a national domestic oil and natural gas offshore production goal to ensure a continued development of America's offshore energy sources. That's H.R. 1231. Hopefully we're going to have that bill on the floor of the House this week or next week. This is important. This is showing real leadership in real energy production. And you see nothing on there says, let's shut down windmill production, or let's shut down solar production, or let's shut down nuclear production, or hydroelectric, or anything else. It's saying, let's produce energy in the form of petroleum products. Another real gas price solution. Restarting America's offshore leasing now, H.R. 1230, Doc Hastings again. Require the sale of specific offshore leases within a set time limits instead of continued administration delays. It is proposed Central Gulf leases in the Gulf of Mexico within 4 months, Western Gulf within 8 months, offshore Virginia within 1 year, additional Central Gulf of Mexico by June 1st, 2012. This bill sets out a roadmap to leasing for production in what we consider our Gulf of Mexico. You know, when it comes to producing of products offshore, the first place it ever happened was offshore Texas. And we've considered that Gulf to be sort of our little saltwater lake out there ever since. Now, that's not exactly true. In fact, it's not true at all. But the point is, to stop the production that's been going on Well, since I was a small child in the Gulf, and I'm no young whippersnapper, well, this starts us back to doing what we do well, producing offshore. Another Doc Hastings bill. And this is one putting the Gulf of Mexico back to work. Require new safety permits to prevent and combat blowouts before drilling. No one in the industry, and I've talked to literally hundreds of people about what the industry, everybody agrees. They are all, they were very proud of the fact that until the BP oil spills looked like they were going to be a thing of the far ancient past. But because that Mexico blowout was, what, 20-something years ago?
Yeah, I was a child.
Yeah. So here's the second. It requires the Secretary to decide on issuing a permit within 30 days of the application, with 2 15-day extensions possibly being allowed, and provide drilling companies with speedy Fifth Circuit Court access if the government violates the law in denying or ignoring the permitting process. Those are good solutions, because not only does it set a standard that the Congress should impose upon the Secretary, but in addition it gives a recourse, the kind of recourse we're supposed to have on these issues of whether or not to drill, and that is to go to the courthouse and let the justice system prevail. And so let's go to the Fifth Circuit, who has already spoken once pretty loudly, and let them speak again. There's one more that I don't seem to have and that is, we need to open up the leasing for our public lands in the West. The states of Utah and Idaho and Wyoming and Montana, we are well aware and very knowledgeable about the amount of a certain kind of heavy petroleum that is available in those areas. North Dakota, probably South Dakota. We're already finding a lot in North Dakota, but all of a sudden it too is struggling to get permits to continue to drill on federally owned public land. And let's always remember that word, public land. It's not the U.S. government's land. It's government. The U.S. government is holding it for the American public. And if we need to lower our prices and have production efficient, we should go where the oil is. I had one of my colleagues one day said, I don't know why you Texans always just want to drill anywhere. If you want to drill, why don't you just drill in your own backyard and where you have a say about it? Well, if there was oil down beneath my backyard, you can bet your soul I'd drill back there in a heartbeat, because I'm not worried about it. In fact, I'll be glad to cut the grass around a producing oil well all day long in my backyard. Won't hurt my feelings at all. And I don't think anybody that knows anything about the industry would feel any other than that. I think it's almost a comment on the industry when you pull out of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, the DFW airport. At the entrance, right to your right, is a pumping oil and gas well that was drilled within the last 3 years, right there in practically downtown Dallas, because they have discovered a field out that way. So, we know that can be done and done safely, and we have to get on it. The New York Times, certainly not any bastion of conservative values, has a little article here. The U.S. consumer prices are up 5%, pushed mainly by food and gas. They will reaffirm they are going to finish quantitative easing. That's this dollar thing I was talking about. But the central bank would remain concerned about the inflation expectations on consumers, who would demand higher wages for businesses, and it could raise prices and perhaps cut spending. What that's all about is, one of the price gouging things that you've got that they're accusing the industry of doing is the fact that we have dumped trillions of dollars into our economy for this quantitative easing of the economy. You've heard from this very House floor how much this body has spent in stimulus and in TARP and in other things in the last couple of years. $1 trillions and trillions of dollars. More money has this organization spent, the Congress of the United States, signed by the president, than in the history of the country. And yet, besides that, our Treasury has been printing money to supposedly ease the economy, and they're literally putting more dollars in circulation, which in turn devalues the value of the American dollar. When the value of the American dollar goes down, the price goes up. Because an apple has a worth. There's a worth, a cost to that apple, and there's a value to that apple on the market. And the value before we dumped cash into the system was $2, and you dump all this, then it'll be $3 or maybe $4, not because the apple's changed, because the dollar's changed, and the dollar's worth less. Why do you think? And by the way, nobody goes to Mexico and Texas anymore, but if you did and you went across the border like some idiot and got shot by the terrorists over there, but if you did, you'd find that they won't even take American dollars in border towns anymore in Mexico. This was written up in some of the border papers. American dollar is not wanted in Mexico because they're concerned about its losing its value. It used to be the peso that we worried about losing its value. Something's gone haywire. But as we devalue our dollar and we create a shortage of our gas and oil, there's no surprise at all that the byproducts of those two products, which is gasoline and diesel, is going up. And it has gone up. And if we don't do something about getting back in domestic production, it's going to go up some more. And if the world perceives that the greatest consumer of energy on this earth is going to have a huge demand when the supply goes down, and they've bought futures on that supply, they're going to get rich. That's not the oil companies we're talking about. That's the people who speculate and the people who cover their energy needs. And by the way, so these same speculators are buying futures on oil and gas from China, from Russia, from India, and from other people, and from Western Europe, to compete for the world market. We have the golden opportunity to at least produce what we can produce. And I'm not in any way cutting down any other energy source. I'm saying all of the above is the solution. But drilling anywhere that it is effective, and drilling now, is the important thing. And those people who think that anywhere you stick an oil well down, there's oil, they just don't understand oil. If they think there's natural gas under any ground, they just don't understand natural gas. And by the way, when Blake was talking about these independents that drill an oil well, the average cost of an oil well that is not that deep is about $1 million. So when you go out and gamble $1 million and come up dry, and you have to drill another well and gamble another $1 million, you know, these guys are the true entrepreneurs of this country, and they can lose their shirt and then get lucky and find an oil well and get their shirt back. But that's the world they live in. That's the world of exploration for energy. And we're not ashamed of it. We're proud of it. We're proud that we still have people who are willing to take the risk that it takes to prosper in America. Our economy, our world of commerce in this country is built upon the risk takers. It's those who invest their capital and their labor into trying to produce a product. And how they between those two, they have some successes and they live through their failures. And unfortunately, we've become a world that thinks anybody that slips up on any form or fashion, we need to bail them out. I got problems with that. Finally, another newspaper article. The Examiner says, oil imports spike as Obama oil ban decreases domestic production. This was April 29th, 2011, which isn't very far past. While oil production in the Gulf is down more than 10% from April 2010, it estimates net crude oil imports are up by 5%. More imported oil also means higher prices at the pumps. So direct result of the actions of the Obama administration, we have the price of oil going up. So tomorrow morning when you go out there and you fill up whatever you're driving, whether it's a smart car or a hybrid that runs on both electricity and gasoline, or whether you're filling up your Suburban. You know, we got fleets of Suburbans in this town. This is supposed to be the conservation capital of the world. Look around Washington, D.C. There's a black Suburban on every corner. Sometimes a whole parade of black Suburbans go by. I'm not picking on Suburbans. I've owned 5 of them. Good cars. But they burn a lot of gas. And you fill one up, you better have a pretty good sized pocket. Because you fill up an empty Suburban at $5 a gallon gasoline, and you're going to need a bank loan. Because that sucker it'll take $100 and something to fill that thing up. And that's the consequences of trying to curtail one industry to enhance another. And that's not the way Americans are supposed to operate. Let's take our going concern and keep it going, and let's build up these alternative energies. And when they are competitive in the world market, turn them loose, stop subsidizing everybody, and let them compete. And may God bless every one of them. That's the way Americans are supposed to operate. And until we get back to operating that way, we're going to find ourselves in this up and down world of shortages. And we're going to find ourselves also in a final world of unemployment. Because since this recession, there's only one place on the earth in the U.S. where jobs are increasing, and that's right here where we're standing. Federal employment is up 11.7%, and the private economy is down 6.1%. These are changes of employment since 2007. So the only people creating jobs are federal jobs, and I would argue that's not the way it's supposed to work. And it's all part of a policy which is misdirected, and I would say because they don't understand the nature of the industries they're dealing with. And they really don't realize how many BTUs of energy it takes to run these lights in this building. But it's a ton of them. And I can tell you, my daddy sold natural gas for 40 years of his life. And he sold it cheap. If he was alive today, he'd crawl out of his grave. And if he knew about the price today, he'd crawl out of his grave and start selling natural gas. But that price has been driven up by the demand. We've got this resource. This resource we can use it cleanly. We can protect our environment. We can live a good life. And we can live the American dream. But you can't do it by trying to kill one industry to enhance another. And I would argue that that is what we have been doing under the Obama administration. And I have a fervent hope that they see the light and back off and let us go back into the production of oil and gas and the other natural resources of this great nation so that we can maintain our status as the best country on earth and the best country that cares about the average guy and tries to keep prices affordable to the average guy. The price gouging that they are accusing of is nothing more than a misinterpretation of the law of supply and demand, and that misinterpretation is hurting the little man in America. It's time to change the policy, and let's all hope and pray that this administration wakes up to many things, but this is one of them. And if they'll wake up to an energy policy that makes sense, we will see the future bright. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.